Welcome back to another episode of Power 2 Pod. This episode, we're going to be talking about the college football playoff and their reseeding and going forward, what the possibilities are. So, that's the itinerary for today. So, let's get started. Um, Last year was the first year of the expanded playoff where we went to 12 teams. It guaranteed an auto bid to the champion of the SEC, Big Ten, ACC, Big 12, and a group of five champion. The top four highest ranked conference champions got a bye. What that allowed was for Boise State to get a bye, which was kind of unintended consequence, I think, of how they did it with the ACC and the Big 12 having a down year. And then with that as well, you didn't have, Penn State was ranked number 3, Texas was number 4. They end up playing first round games at home, so they didn't get that added rest. Not that it helped the four teams that got the bye because they all lost. Um, but yeah, things definitely look a little bit different if what they did last year they did this year, which makes a lot of sense, which is the just doing a straight seeding.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the fans were kind of seeing that the seating, how it was seated, wasn't right, especially when all four buys lost. I feel like that was kind of like a big push for a reseeding or a different way to seed them when the playoffs start.
Yeah, and I mean those are the kind of things I think you'll find when it was the first year of it. Um,
Mm.
so you get the, little tweak here and there, which, this I think is a good tweak for the college football playoff. I don't know about the expansion, but expanding it farther, but I think going straight seeding, still guaranteeing the auto bid, so everybody's still included, but going with the straight seeding, I feel like you get the better representation of how teams or who teams should be playing.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's for sure. But yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it keeps, I guess, evolving over the years. Like you said, there's been talks of like getting like an actual like full on commissioner for college football in general, and what I really like to change is it's kind of off subject a little bit with the playoffs, but the transfer portal and NIL have got to get reined in a little bit because, like you said, you had just for a main instance, like Penn State, they started their playoff run and their backup quarterback transferred out, like right in the middle of the season because that's when they can transfer. And like I said, heaven forbid, like in your first game, um,
If Drew went
drawing a blank
down,
on your
yeah.
quarterback thing, yeah.
Yeah,
If
if
you went
Drew went
down, then you're
down.
automatically down to your third string quarterback just because of the transfer portal. Like they got to make that change to where why can't they do it just after the season? And I get there's some academic issues there, like when semesters start and finish, but I don't know, something's got to change with that because, like you said, you want your best team and your best roster. And usually, when you're playing more playoff games, like going from 4 to 12, and you're playing X amount of playoff games, like depth matters. And if half your depth goes to the transfer portal, like it's just a huge issue.
Yeah, for sure. And now we got this graphic up here so you can see what the playoffs would have looked like if they had straight seeding this year. And it is drastically different. You have Boise State going to Indiana, SMU going to Tennessee, Arizona State going to Ohio State, and Clemson going to Notre Dame. Now, do I think it changes what we would have finished with? I don't think so. I think if you look at this bracket, you can make a pretty good case that we still would have ended up with Notre Dame and Ohio State because we already seen, Notre Dame would have matched up with Penn State in the second round. We already seen how that ended up. Then Ohio State gets Arizona State and Texas. We already seen them beat Texas. I think the teams with the biggest gripe would have been Indiana and Tennessee.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I don't want to sound biased, but I feel like Georgia would have been better off with the straight seeding, matching up against even if Tennessee won. Like we beat them in the regular season. I'm pretty sure we've beat them the last like 8 straight years. Um, and I don't see us losing to SMU, but like I said, we lost to the runner up national champion, so I feel like that would have favored them to put Georgia in, into the Final Four.
Yeah, yeah. I think we end up with really different semifinals. I think we probably end up with Oregon versus Notre Dame instead of Penn State Notre Dame. Then we probably end up with Georgia against Ohio State.
Yeah.
So I think that I think this would have been a better playoff overall, even though it probably would have meant James Franklin still wouldn't have a playoff win. Getting SMU and Boise State there as the easy pull. Um, but yeah, I think the college football playoff committee is making the right choice by going to the straight seeding,
Mhm.
and it's going to be interesting to see this year where we actually get teams seeded how they're supposed to be, and we're not worrying about conference feelings, and we're not worried about including the Big 12 and the ACC and the Group of Five and giving them extra. I don't know what the word for it is, but giving them extra just for winning their conference, even though it's not as strong or they didn't have as strong as seasons.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree. Like you said, strength of schedule should matter. And, just because you're a Big 12 champion or a runner up, like it doesn't mean much when, SEC and Big 10 teams are playing, you know, pristine matchups almost every week, especially when you get into November, late October, November. Um, they have a pretty hard schedule just by playing conference games versus the ACC and the Big 12 where you got maybe 2 3 good teams out of there, not even great teams, just good teams.
Right.
But
Right.
another change that I wish that college football would look at is how long the break is. I'm pretty sure with the teams with a bye last year, I'm pretty sure they didn't play live football for about a month before they played that semifinal football game. And that's just, to me, it's just too long. Like I said, just I get that they're filling in the smaller bowl games, and stuff like that through the beginning of December. But, to go from, your conference champion, a Big Ten championship or an SEC championship, and then take 3, almost 4 weeks off without any live football is very difficult.
Yeah. Well, that's how much time was before, even with the four-teamer. But both teams had the extended time off.
Yeah.
Where this time you had the first round games being played with basically a 2 week break, basically.
Mhm.
So they knocked the rust off, and then they all played the next week with the other team having 3 weeks rest, and it proved rust versus rest.
Mhm. And that's why I
You
think
knock.
Ohio State did as well as they did is because they got to play early and they just stayed hot,
Mhm.
and it's like I said, they rolled through Tennessee. They absolutely dominated against Oregon, and Oregon was a good team. It's easy to say that like, oh, just Ohio State manhandled them and all that. It's just I feel like they were very unprepared and haven't played football in a few weeks to where Ohio State was already ready to go.
Yeah, I think regardless of the seeding, I think how Ohio State played in the playoff,
Hmm.
they were the best team in the playoff. They won the playoff, regardless of who they would have went against. I think, like I said, you just got some different matchups in the semis and the quarters than we got. But regardless, you live and you learn. Like we threw it
Hmm.
out there, played it, realized there need to be change, and they're actually being proactive about it and not waiting, let to see if it's going to work itself out. And we might come and come November, December, and it comes out close to what it would have been. But there's no world where Boise State should have got a bye into the playoff.
Right, exactly.
Like like that.
And a lot of people are very excited for the 12 team playoff, but when they first announced it, I told somebody, I'm like, more games always isn't better football, and I feel like some of those games were exactly that. The Indiana game was kind of a blowout, wasn't competitive. Boise State, Penn State really wasn't that competitive either. I
Well,
watched
that
that
was
game and
SMU. It was SMU Penn State, and then Clemson Texas wasn't really competitive
yeah, but you guys played Boise.
in the second round. In the first round, we had
Yeah,
SMU because the first round was full of blowouts. You had Ohio State blowing out Tennessee, Penn State blew out SMU, Notre Dame blew out Indiana, and
right.
Texas handled Clemson without an issue.
Well, even that's what I'm even saying. Like even the second round, Boise State, Penn
Mhm.
State wasn't a good game in my opinion. Like I said, they were able to stop Genty, and Boise didn't have another option. They didn't have any answers, and Penn State just warmed down
Yeah.
and took over that game. But like I said, it's just to me a second round game shouldn't. I get that they have bad games or whatever, but you could tell just the talent difference between both teams, and especially with that team getting a bye, it's like, what are we doing?
Yeah, yeah, and luckily it'll be fixed going forward here. And talk about going forward, there's always discussions going on. Right now, they're talking expanding to 14 or 16 teams. Um, we haven't. I don't feel like we've seen enough of the 12 team to be like, hey, we need to go to 14. It's strictly a money play at this point, where the
Hmm.
SEC and the Big Ten just want more more of the pie, basically. Because with the 16 team, they were talking about the 1 and 2 seeds getting a double bye.
Oh
So
God.
yeah, the 1 and 2 seed would get the first round and second round off. Other teams are playing 2 games before the 1 and 2 seed get in.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it basically it puts you into the semifinal, basically.
Hmm.
So I mean, it's rewarding you for winning the Big Ten and winning the SEC by putting you directly into the semifinal. So I get that part of it. But what did we learn from the first year of the 12 year? The extra rest isn't always the best
Mm-mm.
solution here. It's always not always best option, and some of that might be fixed with this straight seeding. Hopefully it is, and we get a little bit more competitive first and second round games. Um, but the big thing I think with this expansion is the Big Ten's kind of stopping it right now because the SEC won't step up to the 9 game schedule. I mean, they're currently the only conference of the Big Four that don't have 9 conference games.
Hmm.
Um, and the SEC people, like you're probably gonna say it too, but the SEC, they are the deepest conference, 1 to 16. But you guys still have Mississippi State and Kentucky, just like the Big Ten has Rutgers and Maryland and Northwestern, but they have 18 teams. Um,
Yeah.
so I get the argument the SEC is having. Um, they want the reward before going to the 9 conference games. They want to be guaranteed more spots before they add that ninth game, and everybody else wants them to add that ninth game before they get rewarded with more spots.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, talk about like this last year being like the worst, like debatable, like stance that the SEC can take, because you look back and, Alabama loses to Vanderbilt. That should never happen. I,
They
um,
lost to the
who
bad
else?
Oklahoma team. Like Oklahoma was bad
Yeah.
last year.
Yep. That was the other
Oklahoma
one. And
fans will tell you
then
they were bad last year. You can't
Ole
lose. You
Miss
can't go to
lost to
Oklahoma
a
and lay an
Kentucky.
egg.
Right,
Yeah,
right, yeah. But like Ole Miss losing to Kentucky, like all those bottom feeders you just said had marquee wins last year. So that definitely I feel like puts the brakes on the SEC of wanting to get more gains into like that. But What I don't like the SEC scheduling like format or whatever they're following. Just from the fact, like I said, like, we had a extremely hard schedule, Georgia did. And then now this coming up this year, we have the exact same schedule, just flipped, like home and away games are flipped. Um, and one of the bigger issues that I see with that is we have rivals that we're not going to play for 2 years. South Carolina being one of them. We didn't play them last year. We're not going to play them again this year. And I don't know. I just don't like the whole keeping the same schedule and just flipping home games and away games. Um, I just don't think it's favorable.
Yeah. I mean, anytime you get to these super conferences, you can't play everybody,
Hmm.
and there's so many. Like, Georgia's going to play Florida every year. They're not going to take that one off the schedule. Um, Penn State doesn't technically have that rival that you play every year. Like, we were trying to build one with Michigan State or Maryland, but Penn State's kind of the redheaded stepchild still, and don't have that entrenched rivalry from 80 years, 100 years of playing against the same team. But if the Big Ten really want to do it with 18 teams, you could play every team over a 2-year period with 18 teams. You could schedule it right, but then you're going to lose out on the rivalries, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really tough with the scheduling. But I think the biggest problem SEC has, which was their biggest strength before the last couple of years, is their perception. Because now everybody looks and sees, come November, SEC is playing Mercer.
Yeah.
They're playing Chattanooga State every November, while Penn State's going against Illinois, or you know it's still an FBS, it's still a conference foe, it's a Power 4 team. Um, and with the SEC not winning the national title the last 2 years, public perception of the SEC is maybe you're not the big dog anymore, with the Big Ten winning the last two,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing the SEC complain, oh, we can't play a ninth conference game. Well, don't complain when your teams don't get in, when they lost 3 games and played
Mm-hmm.
3 cupcakes. And the SEC is good about scheduling out of conference. Usually most teams do have one ACC or Big 12, but we're still talking about a step down. Like, the ACC and the Big 12 are still a step down from the Big 10 and SEC in most cases. So
Yeah.
with the expansion, I know all the teams are fighting for bigger piece of the money pie. But I think we need to ride the 12 game out a couple more years at least. And I don't want to see, like we said, the double bye with the 16 teams. That seems crazy to me.
Yeah. To me, if you go to 16, just no buys. Like, and you play your conference championship game and maybe get a week off. Everybody get it seated how you need it to be seated, and then just nonstop, um, week to week football. I mean, I get it that I feel like that's where it's going to head because the FCS does that. They do a 16 team playoff. But again, I'm against it. I don't I don't like more teams. I wish they wouldn't have gone to 12. I wish they would have went to like 6 or 8 at
Mhm.
most.
Yeah, because I
But
think it
now
was
that they
proven. It was
good.
proven last year. I mean, we're talking about, Alabama didn't get in, Ole Miss didn't get in, South Carolina didn't get in. Well, Alabama lost to Michigan in the bowl game,
Mm-hmm.
and Illinois beat South Carolina. And Illinois was the Big Ten's next best team that missed out on the playoff. It knocked out what some SEC people wanted in South Carolina. And you can't tell me both those teams played like they wanted to win that game. They didn't have very many opt-outs. They didn't have, you know, NIL issues, and Illinois and South Carolina, they came to play. It was a great game, and Illinois beat South Carolina. And
Mm-hmm.
that was the fifth best team in the Big Ten last year, where South Carolina was probably fourth, fifth best team in the SEC. So when you're complaining about teams not getting in, you lost to other Big Ten teams.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you said, like you said earlier, more games isn't always better. I think a
Hmm.
lot of times we just need. I'm gonna go back to the BCS. Like the BCS took the human element out of everything. Did computers. The only bad part about the BCS was it was limited to 2 teams.
Hmm.
That was the only bad thing about BCS. It was limited to 2 teams. Do a 12-team playoff. Do the BCS rankings, because then you can't sit there and say, well, the selection committee has all this SEC bias or Big Ten bias. There is no committee.
Yeah.
Like, and with the 12 teams, there's always going to be debate for number 11 and 12. Like, there's always going
Yeah.
to be a debate. But if you take
Hmm.
the human element out of it and take as much bias out of it as possible, I think you get the whole point is to get the X amount of best teams.
Hmm.
And to do that, if you have human element, you're not always going to get the 12 best teams.
Right. Yeah. And I never liked the whole committee, and it's just, random ADs and or whatever, and like you said, there no matter what, there's going to be some type of bias. Like no matter who you have in that committee, just because like you said, they're human, they have their own opinion. But yeah, I agree with you. The BCS would be a lot better now that it opens it up out of the top two.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, like we just expanded. Like let's play it out a few years and see. There's not 16 teams deserving of a national title. Like I get it, we got Ohio State this year who was 8, but if anybody watched those playoff games, Ohio State was really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
They just had
And that's
they had the 1-point loss against Oregon, and then Michigan's got them right now. Michigan's in their head.
mhm.
Like, but if you look, like if we just had the 14 playoff, it would have been Oregon, Georgia, Texas, and Penn State would have been the 4 in, and there had been national outrage because it's just SEC Big Ten. But I mean, you could make they had the 4 best regular seasons. Like,
Yeah.
there's always different criteria, and like the BCS, I think could if you go back to the BCS rankings and do the 12 teams, I think that could circumvent a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And that's why, like I said, I feel like 8 would have been good. Because this is my biggest thing is, no matter who, with especially with straight seating, I feel like it'll be better. Like, how much of a chance does 10, 11, 12 really have to run the table and make a national championship when it's straight seating? And that's why I don't like expanding it to 12. I definitely don't like expanding it to 14, 16 because, like I said, there's such a talent and roster difference from the top team to 12 or 16. The farther you go down, like I said, it's like when you look at it, it's such a huge difference. And like I said, you've seen it. You've seen it with Indiana. Like, yeah, they lost one game, but they had a very favorable schedule. And then they played a real actual team and just got dominated. And that's what you're gonna get. So that's why I don't like it. Like I said, there's gonna be a good handful of teams that don't have a chance to win.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And none of this, they're in talks. I think talks have been tabled for a little bit. So hopefully we don't see any, hey, in 2026, we're going to this model and we get to ride out the 12 team model for a little bit longer. I think that'll do it for us today. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, review. Follow us on our socials. We're on Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. We're everywhere. We got at Power 2 at all the socials. And once again, thanks for watching.
See you.